Hey everyone, today we're talking about a cool DC character and one of the most powerful out there, the Spectre. We'll go over his very first appearance in comics at one of the earliest periods in DC history. Before we get into that, be sure to subscribe to Comic Island for more history on comic book characters, new and old, as well as a whole bunch of other cool content. Early one evening, a detective named Jim Corrigan is with a fellow officer and close friend. They talk about how Jim is excited to be engaged to a wealthy young woman named Clarice Winston. Jim thinks he is the luckiest man on Earth, while his colleague teases Corrigan over the thought of how much his friend is bound to change over the next year because of this. In response to this teasing, Jim dunks his colleague's head in a sink, though the encounter remains largely good-natured. An informant arrives, warning Jim about a planned theft of furs at the Westmore warehouse. Though Jim is supposed to meet with Clarice, he cannot pass up this opportunity. Refusing to pay his informant, instead just insisting the man deliver information whenever he finds it to avoid a beating, Jim rushes off to the warehouse, where he witnesses the robbery begin. Corrigan recognizes the thieves work for a powerful man named Gat Benson. He attacks them and successfully stops the criminal operation. Later, Jim is driving with Clarice, who is still annoyed at him for standing her up. However, he is very dismissive of her concerns, instead berating her, saying he doesn't know why she fell for the man to begin with, but if she wants to love him, he's going to be the one in charge of this relationship. In spite of Jim Corrigan's rude demeanor and domineering attitude, Clarice agrees to this and loves him just the same. Suddenly, Gat Benson himself appears before the couple. Outraged that Jim Corrigan has foiled yet another of the man's many criminal plots, he captures them both at gunpoint. They take Jim and Clarice to a small warehouse next to a river, and force Corrigan into a barrel, into which they pour cement. They throw the barrel into the water, and it settles to the bottom. Jim wakes up to see a beam of light before him. As he moves up into the air towards it, he hears a voice telling the man that his mission remains unfinished on Earth. Corrigan is informed he will return to Earth with supernatural powers until crime is no more. Jim protests, wanting eternal peace instead, but he is unable to stop this task laid before him and finds himself hurtling back down towards Earth, falling through darkness until he finally finds himself back at the bottom of the river, completely unharmed. He's even able to walk around the ocean and then fly up above the water until he is floating in the air. Dismayed at his new abilities, Jim discovers he can also turn invisible at will. Before he can explore any of this further, he hears Clarice call out in fear, and rushes off to save her. With his fiancée in peril and his powers still a mystery, Jim discovers he is able to pass through the walls of the warehouse in which Clarice is being held unseen. The criminals are preparing to kill her, and out of sheer terror, she faints. As one of them readies his weapon to slay the unconscious woman, he suddenly sees the terrible eyes of Jim Corrigan, which now show nothing but death, only for Corrigan to disappear before the crook's very eyes. The man collapses to the ground, and Gat Benson is alarmed to discover his thug is outright dead. Jim appears before the other two, and with a touch, Gat's other employee is turned into a skeleton, which briefly protests before it collapses to the ground, lifeless. Duplicate images of Jim Corrigan appear around the warehouse, and a terrified Gat Benson shoots Clarice before Jim can knock the evil man out. Corrigan is shocked to see his fiancée dying, but when he picks her up, he is surprised to find her completely healed. The couple call in the police, and with a thought, Corrigan is able to revive Gat and the criminal that wasn't horribly turned into a skeleton. Jim is able to keep the details of the whole affair concerning his resurrection a secret, as the crooks are far too traumatized to speak on the matter. He quickly leaves, and sadly feels compelled to break off his engagement with Clarice. This matter is far too dark and complex for him to involve the innocent woman any further, a belief confirmed to him on his way home when he discovers he no longer breathes. In a short matter of time, Jim gets his own place and distances himself from his friends, including a man he was once even boarding with. Alone, he fashions himself a strange new costume to hide his identity when using his powers, and for the first time, Jim Corrigan became the Spectre. Still working as a detective by day, Jim became a powerful superhero who would relentlessly fight crime at night. Even in his earliest days, the Spectre was already one of the most powerful superheroes to ever exist. His overwhelming power made him more than a match against the average criminal, while he easily maintained his secret identity. Bullets would pass through him harmlessly, or if Jim preferred, he could simply will a gun not to fire at all. He now possessed tremendous telepathy and a wide range of psychic abilities. Many would pass out at the mere sight of the Spectre, while he could also give people commands they were forced to obey, and could even read minds. By emitting an unknown form of energy called L-rays, he can even permanently change the personality of others. In addition to all the powers already mentioned, he also had super speed, super strength, the ability to project complex illusions, on a scale as large as creating an entire road, or as detailed and finite as disguising himself perfectly as another person. He could recreate crime scenes in his mind, and perhaps most famously, grow himself to a gigantic size. Though Jim tried to keep his distance from Clarice, his fears of her getting harmed by proximity to Corrigan were confirmed early on in his career as the Spectre when he tried to help out her mother. Clarice was kidnapped yet again as a result of this, and once more nearly shot. As a result, the voice that empowered Jim in the first place, later revealed to be a celestial force called the Presence, reached out to the man once again. It realized the goal of eliminating all crime on Earth was an unrealistic one for a single person, and offered to let Corrigan pass on. Jim, knowing that Clarice was still in danger, refused this offer, though he is warned this meant he was doomed to walk the earth forever. Corrigan was able to save the woman because of this, though she did get a glimpse of the man and took interest in the Spectre. Clarice would often get involved in Jim's early adventures because of this, and in spite of his best efforts to shut down any notion of romance between the two. As a result, he saved her life many times in his early years as the Spectre, and was unable to cut her out of his life at all. After taking her to a wedding between two mutual friends, they started seeing each other again, to the extent Clarice thought Jim might propose once more. Jim's demeanor also improved significantly because of his time as the Spectre. Though now cursed with this life for all eternity, in his early days he found heroism rewarding in and of itself. Once a borderline corrupt detective that treated his fiancée poorly, he now worked hard to help others, look out for Clarice's well-being, and seek out justice to the best of his ability. Where possible, he tried to save as many lives as he could, and bring criminals to the police, easily able to force them into confessing for the crimes they committed. Though Jim was indeed very powerful to the extent the average criminal stood no chance against him, it also made the Spectre the target of powerful beings, including spirits, monsters, and fiends. One such creature was called Zor, a spirit confined to Earth like the Spectre, and possessing a similar level of power. Unlike the Spectre, Zor spread evil instead of good into the world though, and as a result the two battled on at least a couple of occasions before Jim was able to banish the being. We actually covered Zor in my review of Seven Soldiers, and seeing him show up here is just the coolest reference ever to just stumble upon. Grant Morrison does this kind of thing all the time in his writing, making these references to Golden Age heroes, but it's amazing how intact Zor is relative to his appearance in Seven Soldiers. They really did their homework with that story, and it's just cool to see that. In one encounter with a being called Exnon, Jim was nearly enslaved by him after he used a strange artifact called the Power Rod, which Corrigan identified as the creation of some sort of black science. Under Exnon's control, Jim was nearly forced to wipe out his own police force, were it not for the timely intervention of the Presence. It gave him an artifact called the Ring of Life, claiming no man-made mechanism could resist it. This rendered the Spectre immune to the Power Rod and easily able to imprison Exnon in the heart of a meteor. Though things worked out, the actions of a possessed Spectre, and later a human who would impersonate the Spectre shortly afterwards, made the public wary of this mysterious vigilante, whereas at first they had embraced him as a hero. Even Clarice at first stopped trusting the Spectre, while he was now heavily hated by Jim's own police department. Jim was nearly fired himself for being unable to catch the Spectre, until the police chief saw the Spectre's incredible powers for himself. In spite of this, and mounting evidence of the Spectre's goodwill, the police would try to catch him many times, always failing horribly because of the Spectre's incredible powers. Frustrated, they eventually reached out to a seer named Dija Cthulhu, who succeeded in bringing the Spectre under his control. But as it turns out, Cthulhu was not really interested in working for the police, but rather a master at enslaving spirits, and wanted to use the Spectre to steal and murder. Fortunately, the Ring of Life stopped the Spectre from killing anyone, and Corrigan was able to break free, returning the items he was forced to steal, while destroying Cthulhu entirely. The ring proved useful in many such occasions where the Spectre might otherwise have been corrupted or defeated. Still, it is events like these that show Jim Corrigan, no matter how powerful he had become, his world, later identified as Earth 2, was still in danger. Perhaps in response to such threats, the Spectre agreed to work with other, newly emerged superheroes. With a growing need to combat malevolent and superpowered forces increasingly plaguing the Earth, Jim Corrigan, also known as the Spectre, was part of the founding team of the Justice Society of America. In their first meeting, Jim was joined with the greatest heroes of the age: the Flash, Hawkman, Sandman, Dr. Fate, Hourman, Green Lantern, and the Atom. They had dinner with a civilian named Johnny Thunder who had been given wish-granting powers. At Johnny's request, each shared a story of their greatest adventure. The Spectre told a tale of an adventure he had long ago at his home in Central City. Jim was called in to investigate when a security guard was strangled by an individual with super strength. Murders continued, and Jim noted they would happen every full moon. Jim was then attacked by a living bronze statue, which would have fatally thrown the Spectre into a wall were it not for his ability to turn intangible. When the Spectre pursued the statue, it identified itself as the Mighty, an evil spirit that had possessed a statue in Central City. Claimed to have been from the dark side of the moon, and hunted on Earth eons ago before going to a distant part of the universe for a brief rest. Having returned, relished in the opportunity to slaughter once more, but agreed to a gamble with the Spectre first. Whoever would bring a rare stone back to Earth could have the planet, while the other would have to leave this world forever. The Spectre and raced off into the cosmos, but Corrigan was able to open a portal to a dimension he seemed to have a connection to called L-Space, giving him a shortcut to the stone. The Spectre arrived in a realm called Ysgardal, where the red moonstone they were seeking was being held. Though called on a dragon living there to stop the Spectre, Jim was able to grab the dragon's tail and shake him up and down repeatedly, rendering the beast unconscious. Used the distraction to seize the red moonstone of Ysgardal, and the two raced off towards Earth. On his way home, Corrigan was able to superheat the stone, forcing to drop it, and allowing the Spectre to seize it and take it back to Earth. However, broke the bet and refused to leave, and enraged, Jim forced the being into the statue's original pedestal, pulled spirit out, and placed it within the moonstone, throwing the rock off into space. After all the superheroes finished telling their stories, the first ever meeting of the JSA was concluded. They agreed at their next meeting to introduce the team to the head of the FBI, after Jay Garrick, also known as the Flash, was able to get in contact with the man. The FBI chief was very happy to work with these new heroes to combat threats to America, in the form of spies and those who sought to undermine freedom. This was especially critical given that America was on the cusp of entering the Second World War at the time. The team readily agreed to help out, and each were given a mission. Corrigan was asked to investigate a sabotage at a munitions factory out in Pittsburgh. Using his powers of invisibility, Jim was easily able to find the saboteur and stop him with a single gesture, at which point the criminal was discovered by the factory managers and brought in to the FBI. However, on his way to the bureau, an armored vehicle crashed into the FBI car, and gangsters managed to grab the saboteur. Luckily, this allowed the Spectre to follow the car to the saboteur's superior, who in turn called the leader behind this operation. The ever-powerful Spectre was able to travel through the phone line and discover yet another saboteur, and by reading that man's mind, he was able to discover the mastermind was named Fritz Claver, leader of a sinister organization called the Fifth Column. On Jim's way to confront the man, he was attacked by mysterious orbs Corrigan called vampire globes that tried to erase him from history entirely, but Jim destroyed them with the Ring of Life. Corrigan arrived to confront Fritz in Toledo, Ohio, where he met up with the rest of the Justice Society who had come to a similar conclusion, and together they brought down the Fifth Column, marking their first victory as a team. Similar activities by the JSA were wildly successful. Crime noticeably dropped, attracting the attention of criminal masterminds like Mr. X, a racketeer that tried to orchestrate the downfall of the entire JSA by organizing a series of individualized plots. Knowing the Spectre was very powerful, Mr. X went after the wary public perception of the man, and then tried to use a magic ring that nullified Corrigan's powers. This plot failed, and Mr. X ultimately was sent to jail. In the early days, it was often standard procedure for the JSA to meet, identify a goal, and each go off on their own missions before meeting up together again for a debriefing. This allowed them to accomplish a wide variety of tasks, ranging from tackling entire criminal operations all at once to helping raise money for war orphans as World War II ramped up around them. The first time the team broke this pattern was after the Flash and Green Lantern stepped down as full-time members, instead becoming honorary members of the JSA, along with two other popular superheroes, Batman and Superman. Similarly, Johnny Thunder, thanks to his wish-granting abilities, found himself more and more a part of the team and eventually was also made an honorary member. After a harrowing battle with an evil man called Professor Elba, the JSA was joined by another member, Dr. Midnight. Though various other team members would come and go, such as Our Man leaving the team and a hero named Starman joining in his stead, the Spectre remained an essential part of the JSA throughout, always cooperating well with his peers. As foreign tensions between America and the Axis grew, the JSA was asked to perform covert ops in South America, in the hope of preventing spies from bringing fascism to those countries. The Spectre was sent to Buenos Aires in search of a military aircraft going missing in the area. Corrigan discovered Nazis were stealing the planes, but Jim was able to stop them by turning giant and destroying the vehicles, then defeating the men responsible. The JSA would continue working closely with the US government during this time, defeating more spies, aiding research scientists, and anything else that would help further protect America. In one adventure, the JSA was transported to the year 2442. While each member of the JSA went on their own private adventure in the future, Spectre traveled to the world of Ultima, the farthest outpost of civilization. Jim found a floating city there and defeated two assassins, before traveling back to the past with the rest of the team. After this, the US officially entered World War II. Jim decided he couldn't enlist, knowing his non-living status would be a problem during recruitment, though the rest of the team eagerly joined. Corrigan meanwhile decided to stay on the home front, protecting it from any possible threats. This plan was short-lived, however, as each other member of the JSA was so impressive in the military, the commanders asked the team to get back together as a special unit. They invited another hero who had also proven remarkably effective in the early days of the war. So Wonder Woman joined the team, which became known as the Justice Battalion. Whether facing off against threats such as the Black Dragon Society or protecting the food supply, the Justice Battalion proved a remarkable fighting force to be reckoned with. Recognizing the threat, a group of Nazis built a number of rockets, captured the battalion, and forced each of them into one before launching them into space. The Spectre arrived on Pluto, where he found a hidden underground city, populated by refugees from a star system called Andromeda. The Spectre helped the people of this city deal with an invading faction and made a repair to their protective infrastructure, before he raced off back to Earth. Together, the JSA defeated the scientists responsible for building the rockets, and rejoined the war effort, much to the fury of Hitler himself. Inevitably, all things must come to an end. So was true of World War II, and the JSA ultimately returned home to resume their traditional crime-fighting ways. Though Jim remained a superhero in his home of Central City, and as a member of the JSA, little did he know that things would soon forever change the once living man. While Corrigan was still helping out the JSA, One day, the detective discovered his friend, Tim Donovan, had gone missing. As he raced off to investigate this disappearance, his supernatural senses suddenly detected a presence in the trunk of his car. Corrigan discovered a young man named Percival Popp, the super cop, an amateur obsessed with fictional detectives that wanted to use their methods to solve real crimes. Percival wanted to work with Jim Corrigan, but Jim was completely disinterested as he always worked alone as a police detective. Nevertheless, Percival followed along, much to the ire of Jim Corrigan. The young lad was able to deduce that Tim Donovan was being threatened by a mysterious individual called the Avenger, impressing Corrigan, but not wanting to endanger Percival, he turned into the Spectre and hung him up on a tree. As the Avenger began threatening others, the Spectre noted that these men were all connected through the same company, while Percy escaped and discovered these people were vanishing in plain sight. When Percival tried to help, he too disappeared. It turns out the Avenger was a scientist named Mortimer Crandall, who was using a device to capture people responsible for firing the villainous man from a demanding job. Fortunately, the Spectre was able to save Percival, but Mortimer had a special invention ready to force the Spectre under his hypnotic control. With some quick thinking, Percy tricked the Spectre, breaking Jim free of the hypnosis and allowing the Spectre to take Mortimer to a special nebula that purged the scientist of all evil thoughts. With that, the day was saved, though Percy was so encouraged by this, he promised to always stay by Corrigan's side, and the older detective realized eluding Percy would become a new ongoing duty for the superhero, and could very well prove a greater task than fighting crime. Percival became determined to prove himself to the Central City police detective. The young man saw an escaped prisoner named Gat Cheney, who Corrigan had put away, trying to break into Jim's home. Percival was attacked when he tried to stop this home invasion, and so Jim became the Spectre to help out the so-called super cop. Fed up with this, Jim decided to take Percival out into space, leaving him millions of light years away on a tiny planet just so he could get some sleep, since as everyone knows, although ghosts don't breathe, they definitely need 8 hours of good sleep every night, just like humans. Next day, Jim nearly forgot Percival, and the Spectre had to save the young man from an alien. Though Corrigan found the whole affair amusing, Percival shared in his dislike of the terrifying superhero with the rest of the Central City Police Department, insisting that one day Popp and Corrigan would capture the Spectre together, not realizing that the Spectre and Corrigan were the same person. When finally returned home, Percival decided to help Jim by getting him back together with his ex-fiancée, Clarice Winston. Percival came upon Clarice getting a portrait done of herself, and she told the young man about how Jim was the one who broke off their engagement and seemed to want to keep her at a distance. Percival agreed to talk to Corrigan, but on his way to do so, he noticed the artist painting Clarice behaving oddly, while Clarice seemed to be getting weaker ever since the stranger started painting her. Percival spied on the artist, a man named Armand, and saw him drive up to a dock and throw a strange figure into the city's river. Percival told Jim about all of this, and Corrigan agreed to look into the matter. They had went to Clarice only to learn she had fallen deathly ill, confirming their growing suspicions of foul play. However, when the two started investigating, Percival decided to dive into the river to look for the figure dumped there. It is at that moment Jim realized that this was all happening in the same river where Corrigan initially drowned, in the exact same spot where his body was dumped. If Percival found the body, it would mean that everyone would have learned that Jim Corrigan died a long time ago and he is nothing more than a spirit. So the Spectre dove into the water and found his own body, still stuck in the barrel of cement it was drowned in. The Spectre reached out to the very same presence that initially revived him as a spirit, and in response to Corrigan's many good deeds on Earth, they allowed him to return his own body to life. The barrel shattered, and Jim woke up, restored, while the Spectre faded away. He swam up to the surface, where he quite literally bumped into Percival, showing the young man that he had recovered the metal figure while he was down there. Armand the artist then confronted the two at gunpoint, explaining that he is obsessed with using black magic and the metal figure to steal human souls through his painting. Throwing it in the river was an essential part of the ceremony to take Clarice's soul, which is why she fell deathly ill immediately after he did so. But now Armand needs the figure back, so he knocks Percival out and shoots Corrigan 3 times. Jim Corrigan thought he was about to be killed again mere moments after his resurrection, only to find Armand's bullets go right through him. Corrigan had retained his superpowers, and turning into the Spectre once more, he easily defeated Armand, forcing the artist to vanish completely. Thanks to his resurrection, Corrigan decided that was reason enough to patch things up with Clarice, and they got back together again, much to the delight of Percival. And with his superpowers still intact, Corrigan's time as the Spectre was hardly over either. Though he still remained a part of the JSA and would often think of the Spectre as a spirit of sorts living within him, Corrigan began living his new life a little more, taking a backseat in his own adventures, spending more time with Clarice, and acting as a bit more of a guide for Percival Popp to grow as a detective, though Corrigan would never hesitate to use his powers to save Percival and others. Working with Percy, they were able to defeat a long string of villains, including the Headman, who actually didn't have a head, an illusionist named Kadilugi, a crooked businessman named Mr. Chiseller, and a master of hypnotic collars called Spectrum, along with many others. They would fight crimes ranging from grand theft to fraud involving junk war bonds. And in spite of all the changes to Jim Corrigan, some things still remained the same. The police continued to hate the Spectre, while Jim was repeatedly ordered by his captain to focus on capturing the vigilante, in spite of how clearly powerful and well-meaning the spirit was. On one occasion, when it came to a truly powerful foe, a deadly elementalist named Maligno, the Spectre stood against this being alone. But this was rare, and otherwise, Percival remained persistently at Jim's side, no matter what Corrigan did. Though Jim tried to maintain an aloof personality around the young man, in an attempt to keep Percy at a distance, allowing his Spectre persona to work more with him instead. This caused Percival to start liking the Spectre more, while Jim slowly began warming up a bit more to Percival in general. The two became a formidable team by the time Jim was finally called upon to serve in World War II. Unbeknownst to the JSA, while he was off to war with them, he had split himself into two different personas. A powerless copy of Jim went off to war, filling his draft requirements as a living man, while a copy worked as a Spectre, working both invisibly on the home front and helping out publicly with the Justice Battalion. To avoid confusion, the Spectre stayed invisible while working with Percival, helping the young man continue his fight against crime while Jim was away. Percy soon realized this and found himself in the company of a ghost, with the young man now being followed by Corrigan relentlessly and even having to put this version up in his home, allowing the Spectre to sleep in his own bed, since, as far as Clarice knew, Jim was off to war. Together, the two defeated a slew of criminals and went on many adventures, keeping their home of Central City safe. By the end of their time working together, Percy had become an adept detective on his own. When Jim returned from war, he allowed Percival to work on his own and focused on helping the JSA protect America a little more. For a brief time, he worked to combat threats with a team of all sorts. One such adventure involved the team being flung back in time. The Spectre found himself in 1815, where he prevented Robert Fulton, inventor of the steamboat, from being killed, before he was sent back to the present with the rest of the team. Seeing the various intolerances of the past put towards new ideas and those who are different, the entire JSA was moved to make a public statement about how America is supposed to be for all, regardless of race, color, or religion, and vowed to combat this together. However, the next adventure would prove to be the Spectre's last for a very long time. The Justice Society was alerted to the actions of Psycho Pirate, a dangerous criminal who was able to bring out the rage, hate, and sorrow in men. He sent a taunting letter to the JSA, warning of 6 crimes he had planned, and each crime requiring a member of the team to overcome a certain emotion. The Spectre was tasked with fighting a crime involving greed, an emotion that he felt he had already conquered in life. As he began to unfold a plot involving bribery, the Spectre was dosed with a toxic gas that nearly overwhelmed him, thanks to his greedy attempts at solving the crime quickly. With some quick thinking, the Spectre survived the gas attack and nearly caught Psycho Pirate himself. Corrigan joined with the rest of the team, and they defeated the villain together. Though victorious, this marks the last known adventure of the Spectre during this era. Jim Corrigan lost his powers, and the Spectre persona mysteriously vanished completely, with no explanation. For the next 20 years, Jim worked as a police detective, left to wonder what happened to one of the most powerful forces that ever walked on Earth too.